Welcome to A Canadian Investing in the U.S., a podcast and YouTube channel focused on Canadians buying real estate with host Glenn Sutherland.
Well, welcome to a new episode of Canadian Investing in the U.S. with Glenn Sutherland. This week, my guest is Jordan Silvester. Jordan, you want to give everyone a bit of a background, a little bit who you are, and maybe a little story, and then how you got to where you're going, and then we'll get into this.
Sounds good. I'm Jordan Silvester. I'm a realtor in Windsor, Ontario. I work for Keller Williams Lifestyles Realty. I've been doing this business for about 16 years. My father was in it since 1988, so got to rewind the clock a little bit to get back to that time frame. Looking forward, I jumped into the business when I was 23 years old, so approaching 40 at the moment. Learned a lot through those years. Myself as an investor, that's been more recent. I spent a lot of the early part of my business helping people invest. Yep. The repossessions in 2008 and all the things that came down there, learning the trade then and then becoming an investor myself. So lots of life lessons, lots of them learned the hard way, learning to listen to the advisors around you instead of taking your own advice from the mirror. So.
Oh, sorry. Excuse me.
That's okay.
No. So Jordan, let's dive into this. So I know you're a realtor. I believe you do some investing as well. What kind of stuff are you looking at? I know we were just chit-chatting beforehand. You talked about doing extra units, some vacation homes. What works in 2024?
Yeah, so in 2024, I find that you can't just buy the single family property without an additional opportunity for wealth creation. So whether that is going to be the Airbnb or vacation style rental within it, so you can get that extra income, because again, it's a little bit more turnover, but you get that premium on that, or you have to have the unit where you can add that auxiliary dwelling unit, either exterior or basement. Of course, if you have the right height in the basement, makes life simple. You're able to then, inclusive a lot of the time the property, which isn't everyone's favorite thing to do. There are some strategies I use around that, which you set a limit on it with the tenants, so it is inclusive up until a point, and then the tenants split it. But yeah, doing the conversion where you buy the property, main floor unit, 2-bed, 3-bed, and then you can convert the basement into at least another 2-bedroom unit. And that way you can maximize potential in the current market while interest rates are high, and then you'll super cash flow, hopefully, when they bring rates back down to, it doesn't need to be 2% again. We can go with a 4% interest rate, and all of a sudden your cash flow is going to jump by $500-$600 a month. But right now, even when you do a lot of these conversions, you'll be only about $200 to $300 in cash flow, versus before where you would do these conversions and you could bump up to almost $1,000 a month in cash flow, which of course makes everybody happier when there's more money for the ability to pay down the mortgage, or have a few more times out golfing that month, or whatever it is that you're interested in.
Yeah. So if you're like doing vacation homes and you're doing an extra unit, would it ever make sense to do them both in the same building?
So I had a friend, actually, so it wasn't me personally, but he bought a property with a basement unit where basically his theory was to have the maid or the person who would take care of the upper unit live there. And so they would pay them extra money. They would be able to stay on the property. So they would pay, I think he had it around $1,200 a month for the basement unit, which would normally be, call it $1,800 inclusive. So $600. And then they would turn over the property upstairs whenever the tenants would move in and out from the vacation. And it was designed to be weekly. So she'd go up once a week, clean up towels. She could do all the laundry, do all of the stuff within the property and house it there. That worked well for about a year and a half till, of course, the lady found a husband, and then everything changed. And so again, in investing, there are some really cool ideas and they work really well for the time, but people's lives change. And again, finding that exact same person to do the exact same thing, it was a really good idea. And I think if you can manage it, but it's probably from that experience, and we chatted, he still put a regular tenant in the basement at $1,800, and then he just paid a service fee moving forward to do the upper level of that property, because that property on the upper level had the waterfront views and had some really cool experiences. Nice. Whereas the basement was a little more like dungeony. Like, it wasn't bad. Like, you're still on the water. It's beautiful, but you had decent window, but it wasn't the same, of course, as the main floor where he could pump out. I think he was renting the main floor weekly at like $2,600 a week, like something insane. Price on the property was, I think, 980,000 Canadian. So it wasn't a cheap property, but when you have 1,800 coming from the basement, and you're getting another almost 10K a month, give or take. And again, I think he ran at 73 or 76% occupancy, because of course up here we get winter, unlike some of the Americans down south where you can keep your vacation rental usually full, except maybe in hurricane season in Florida there on the coast.
Yeah. With having someone in the basement, I always wonder, like, especially if they're like supposed to be like the cleaner for upstairs, like they're going to go on vacation. You're going to have to, figure that out. They're going to have, they're people with a life. And like, honestly, like I'm I always get like torn whenever I'm like, even if say you have a fourplex and you have a tenant that wants to just cut the grass for all of it. What happens if they're not around to cut the grass? Like it's a lot of times you're like, yeah, it's cheaper, it's more efficient to have them there, but sometimes I'm like, I just want a third party company that's larger, even if it costs me more, because I know it'll get done.
Right. And so you don't end up in a situation where you yourself, especially if you're not local, right? Local allows you the flexibility to step in that moment. But if you're not local and you don't, and the person for any reason doesn't tell you, you could have a big mess on your hands. And again, that's, I think, the lesson learned was why he went after that situation and went to that. We are doing currently in the city of Windsor, we've got the battery plant being built. So we've got a lot of short temporary workers coming in. So with all of that, like we basically have hired like Molly Maid type service to come in. It's one of the ladies that we know, but she runs a cleaning business local. Yeah. And so she does the turnover service. So we know when the booking's ending, she knows when to be in. And if she can't do it, she's got 7 or 8 other ladies who can. And that magically makes everything much simpler. So if somebody goes down sick, right? Let's say this lady, like she goes sick or something happens. It's not even their fault. They get in a car accident. Like so many things can happen in life when you're using a single person to cover a large amount of things than when you have a company or a business doing it. Because if somebody does go down, somebody's watching to see if it gets done because they have a staff or a thing, and B, if that person needs to be replaced, they usually can find at least somebody else or even subcontract it out just to make sure it gets done for their client, right? Because if you're in a business like I am, sometimes I can't get everything done, and I've got other realtors or people who come along and support me in my business because I definitely don't want to I want my clients to be serviced correctly at all times and not feel like they're being, just because I'm unavailable, they're being left in the lurch. So,
yeah. And I'm just thinking about that project. If you were going to do something like that, would you, I'm just thinking financing wise, like, it's a lot of money, right? Like, at least I'm used to American, so I'm usually buying much cheaper homes than that. But it's a lot of money you're financing, and then you're doing a renovation on all of that, and then you're turning it into a vacation rental, which I found in the U.S. is always a little bit more difficult to finance, or even higher interest rates in order to be able to do that. It's like one thing onto another with the carrying costs. Like, does it still make sense to do this with the current rates?
What I find actually most interesting about the current rates is you're banking on maybe a 2% increase on the current rate, whereas before it felt like you were still in that 6-7% window on a lot of the private money that you were going to use to do this, and now it's maybe 8 or 9. But prime, like, you want to go get to the bank, it's 6.24. So again, I think if you're going to run it for the first year, you can run it on the extra 2%, 3% that you might end up paying. And then after that, the banks, once you have income rolling, one of the biggest things I've learned is you have credit unions, they're still going to give you like closest to prime rates, like, so that if you were to go to an A lender, and the way that you describe the way the money comes in also matters. So it depends on your own, wherever you want to call it, moral compass, and how you describe information coming in as a company to the bank and how they're going to finance property, and disclosure with the bank about those things. That's really up to you. And I can't advise you, again, as a licensed realtor. I'm not going to advise you to do anything that would put you in a situation with a bank, but a lot of banks do understand now, and they're starting to understand the difference that you can find, especially in short-term rentals and the income from them. Again, they don't like it when it's like, oh, look, I've been making this money for 3 months. No one cares. Make it for 3 years. Banks tend to be like, okay, seems more real. It's like a business. You want to run a business, you want to borrow money with your business, you have to have 2 years on the books. I find, with the right mortgage brokers, with the right people in your back pocket, there are some ways. But yeah, up front, you're probably going to leave, on a deal that, let's say you're all in and you're leveraging almost $600,000-700,000. Well, there goes 21 grand a year to that, right? So you're going to pay that extra 3%, whatever it is, and you're going to end up like, oh, okay, there goes 21,000. But if it's still profitable, and that's the game, and then you can actually turn that on, or you can get the interest rates to come down. Is even with your private lenders, once you prove to them that you're paying and that there's consistency, you renegotiate after the first year. Maybe they'll give you a 1 or 2% discount because they want to keep your business, because they know that you're doing well. So it's all about relationships, I find, with a lot of these B lenders, because a lot of them are relational or even private money lenders that want to just park their money in real estate versus a GCI or some other form of, conventional location. So I have a lot of private guys that will work even at 8%, 7%, even today sometimes, to do some deals, as long as they trust the property, the equity's there, there's enough margin, 65% loan to value most of the time if you want the lower rates. 80-20, you're going to push up. And then if you want better than that, there are guys that do it, but then you're at like 15 and a half.
Yeah.
And at 15 and a half, I find it very difficult for most people to find cash flow in any way, shape, or form for any meaningful amount of time. So
No, not on a $900,000 house. That
yeah.
turns into quite a large payment. Does it still make sense to buy these as just like a single family home, or you probably should be using a more creative strategy like a vacation rental, or adding an extra unit, or does it still make sense to just buy a house? Hello, everybody. Thanks for listening to the podcast. I just wanted to let you know that I've created a new coaching program. I believe the new coaching program has way more value than any of the programs that have even existed in the past. What we've done is pre-recorded all the lessons so that you can work through it at your own pace, which is pretty cool. And then we're going to meet up on a regular basis to answer the questions, do deal analysis, and actually spend our time together working on things instead of spending our time learning things. I think this will make a seamless transition to buying in the United States and will help you solve a lot of your problems. If this is of interest to you, go to glensutherland.com/coaching. I hope to help you guys invest in the United States, and I hope we provide as much value as possible. Back to the podcast.
Like if you're looking to buy a house just to live in it, or
to rent.
Yeah. So renting to buy homes, like I said, I would usually look to, like in Windsor specifically, like that's waterfront. So if you leave the waterfront and you go just back to more conventional, we have the university, college, and you go to student rental level. So even still it's shorter term, but it's year over year. Then you're just going into your basic conversions. You can buy duplexes in Windsor, Essex that might need some TLC between like 450 and 550. And then you put, 70, 80 grand, add the other unit, depending on how the basement lays out. There are some benefits to that. Then if you have the 3 units, it cash flows, you're able to push to that level. You may not get the same cash flow you were looking at a couple of years back. But again, if you can hold, one of my buddies has said it, I'm sure he got it from somewhere else. His name's Glenn McQueenie. He says you date the rate, right? So whether in Canada, we have a 2-year, 3-year, 4-year, however long you're with the rate. But if the rate comes down, you can change your cash flow. Again, you got to take into consideration where you think it's going to go. And it's like anything, you're looking into the crystal ball in the future and hoping that rates will be at 4.5% instead of 6.5%. And if you're wrong and they're at 8.5%, you still want to make sure you either have an exit strategy to, of course, get out before you can't, and or that there's enough cash flow that if it does go negative for a little bit, you have the money to carry it through that time. So I actually, on all my properties, carry it's sort of like what the condo buildings do. I have a reserve fund. So anything that I think might break in that property, or any amount of, like for 3 units, I'll carry about $8,000 per unit. In that way, if it goes vacant, right, and you're talking $1,600 to $1,800 a month, I have a few months if it's a problem to refix it, or if the tenant left it wrecked, I can go in, clean it, spend $3,000 or $4,000 to get the property back up to par and re-rent it. So that's really one of those other pieces when you're looking at it. But yeah, I think you can invest now. I wouldn't do waterfront personally because I like you said, the prices are still really high, and with interest rates as high as there, it's really hard to finance and maintain. I would always look to the lower end of the market where you can find more consistency, more people can afford it. You're not trying to find everyone I've talked to, their belts are a little tighter these days. Everyone's a little more cautious. Cost of living for everyone, whether you're in that echelon where you're making money or where you're just starting out, everyone's belts got tightened by inflation over the last couple of years. So I would say, I will lean to where the most people are who can afford to buy the product that I'm offering, right? Like I want to be in the price point where everyone exists and not necessarily be in the elite side in this current market, because I think you're adding risk unduly to your own, like there's no profitability I see above than just doing 2 of these. If you can buy 2 at 500 instead of 1 at $1 million, why wouldn't you? Because you're going to be in a better financial position. You may only have to liquidate 1 and you still have an asset. So if you get into a bad spot.
And I saw a lot of saw some articles. I don't remember where I was looking at them, and like for the cottages and those sort of things, because you triggered my memory talking about the waterfront stuff. That they're way down right now. Like, is that like an opportunity? Do we think that's going to go back up? Or I guess it just the deal has to make sense. I don't know. Like, tell me, where do you think you're at on this? If someone wanted to buy their cottage or turn it into a vacation rental when they're not using it, is this the time? Is this the lowest? Or do you wait until spring when Americans are planning on an interest rate decline, right? The Fed's talking about that. Canada has, at least as far as I know, I haven't seen anything from Canada saying that they're planning to do the same, but usually it's fairly similar. is it better to wait for the interest rate to drop? I'm just wondering what your take on that kind of crystal ball is.
Yeah. So with the crystal ball I have, I would recommend you buy now. And if you're going to do it, so if you're like, I want to get into a vacation home, I have enough money, I'm going to be able to protect myself. If the vacation home were to drop by another $100,000, I'm not going to sell it anyway. So if your bet is that the market is going to increase, I'm going to buy this, I'm going to flip it in a year. I don't think that's the best play to make, only because we all know that there's a US election coming. We all know that a year after that, there's a Canadian election coming. There's a lot of policies and things that might change that really do boost the market, because everyone knows that when you got to be reelected, you want to make everybody happy for a minute, and then everything comes back to reality. But right now, if you're looking at, again, Muskoka, if you're going to be in this area, like a lot, like you mentioned, that area was booming, and then it's calmed down. Again, I think if you have the right cash flow strategy, and I don't mind if it's a little negative even on those types of properties, because I do think over time you'll always win, right? If you have a 5-year window on most property today, I think my crystal ball is a little clearer. I think 5 years down the road, because if you look at real estate over a 5-year window, it's almost never worth less than it was in that window. So if you go back to 2007, 2006, and then you go to 2011, 2012, magically, the price of that same asset is higher. Now, there was a moment in the middle where it went down. So if you're buying and you don't have an exit strategy, or something major could change in your life that causes this to be a burden, I would say take that as your own risk as an investor. Again, if you create a great reserve fund so that if you had to hold it for a year vacant, you could. Like, there's some extra steps I might take in vacation rentals, just because if something does happen to the equity market and you're struggling to rent it out, or you don't want to rent it out because it's, could get damaged or whatever could happen there. I think you just have to have a lot of strategies in place. But yeah, right now in the market in Canada, it's probably going to be the cheapest likely we're going to see forever. Like, I don't know. Like, and I mean that honestly, like everybody asks, well, if you could go back in time to 2008, when the last crash happened, when I was just entering the business, didn't know, I was a kid, 23, what would you do now? I said, I'd buy everything. I would literally buy every single property. I would leverage all of the money and buy it all because of what I know today. I said, 10 years later, those properties that were $80,000 were now $350,000 and got all the way up to $520,000, right? $80,000 to $520,000. That was the separation of value. That's insanity. And so when I look back, so again, as an investor myself, I'm being cautious today and recognizing that this might be this very moment where we're sitting at the lowest. Now, does that mean it can't get worse? Does that mean governments can't spend more money and make things worse on us? No, it could. I'm just saying it's unlikely, because if you look at cyclical history and you look at the reality of, what happens before usually repeats itself, I think we're in a market where we're going to see the increases. I think we're going to be in a position where you're going to regret not putting up the money in the next 3 months versus waiting to the spring market, like your question, started with. But the spring market, the issue is going to be is all of the buyers come out. A lot of people start to look at their options. The average price goes up as it's an inflation of the average market, usually through April, May, June, and then we see it dip back down through summer, and then we see it level back off towards the end of the year in the September, October, November markets, right? And so I would be cautious if you're waiting and you're like, oh, well, I'll just wait to see what happens with the interest rate. Buy a property today, have it close in May, adjust the rate down hopefully by then, and if it doesn't, just make sure it still works as it currently would. And you lock in your rate now, so the only benefit you have is you can do that for I think 60 to 90 days, depending on the banking institution. And if it goes down, they'll give you the better rate. So why not take that opportunity when rates might be dropping? And everyone says, like you said, US is going to drop the Fed. We as a group believe that we're going to, I've seen articles saying up to 2.25% reduction, which means we'll go from 7.25 back down to 5, which means you'll be on the variable somewhere around 4 to 4.5. And then the fixed rate follows the bond market, which is already starting to come down. We're already seeing that one back into the mid 5s out of the 6.49, 6.24. So there's a lot of benefits, I think, right now to locking up the property, maybe with a little further out plan, as long as your plan is then to, of course, make sure it's cash flow positive as the numbers stand today, and that you can't lose the rate and bet on the rate not going up. Because again, I would be very cautious on trusting the current economics of our world to be 100% authentic in what they say they're going to do as the Bank of Canada said in 2022, hey, we're going to raise the interest rate to 3.5%, and they went to 7. So I think when you double your prediction, and I know the rate was at 2.5, but like to double the prediction instead of raising it a quarter, like basically they're going to raise it a quarter every quarter. By the end of the year, they'd more than doubled the interest rate and really put a lot of people, including myself and businesses, in a bad spot, because almost all business loans, not just in real estate, are all held on prime plus or prime minus, right? And so I just find it interesting. I think there's going to be hopefully a lot of opportunity for investors coming up. I think they always say the best time to sell is never, the best time to buy was yesterday, right? And so
Yeah.
I can say that there was a time for a minute where maybe that wasn't the most true statement at the end of March of 2022, but pretty much ever since then, I think you're going to be in a spot where the market's going to be favorable as long as you're in the hold position. I think if you're in the flip position, caution. Hold position, you're going to hold it 5 to 10 years. Yeah, I don't see any issues, and just make sure it's cash flow and protected.
Well, me personally, I always am looking to either buy it cheap, right? Buy it at a discount, and I'm typically looking to buy it at a discount and renovate it, right? And winter is the perfect, like for me personally, I love to buy in the winter, so I hit the spring market, right? Yeah. So if you depend, like this is sort of like you take this with a grain of salt. I'm not giving any financial advice, but if you were like looking, you think the interest rates are going to drop, then if you bought now, renovated on like a hard money loan, a short-term loan, private loan, something like that, the perfect time to refi will be once the rates drop in 3, 6, 9 months or whatever, right? And you have your reno done, you'll be hitting the market, right, to find your tenants, or your if you're doing this in Canada, you could hit your short-term rental, vacation rental, people to time it out, right? But honestly, the best time to reno is in the winter, because that's the low time, even for rentals. To if you're even, for me, I do a lot of stuff in cold states. That's the best time, or the hardest time, to find tenants to move. They don't want to move between Thanksgiving and New Year's at all. They don't want to buy houses in that time. So if people aren't buying houses, the inventory is giving you a discount because it is what's sitting there. It might be the opportunity to pick it up cheaper and get your renovation done, and then hit the timelines correctly. This was not financial advice, because I have no idea if that much, but if for sure if the interest rates are going to go in, because I'm honestly completely confused. The Fed, not to make this too much of back to the American spot, but normally they hold their cards tight, and they don't tell people what they're gonna do rate drops. They told us that they're gonna do 3 rate drops, and you're like, with all of this, you got to go, why? Why would they tell us? Because they didn't tell us when they were going to raise it. They don't tell us ever. So it's like they're prepping everyone to be prepared to start going or something. It's this is your own interpretation of this, but that's the weird part, is that they don't usually tell this. So they're telling us, and they don't do things for no reason. They're telling us for a reason. Mm-hmm. So it's like, get your cards ready, get ready to go. I don't know if that's what they're telling us, but yeah.
So we'll put the tinfoil hat on for a minute.
Okay.
And,
all right.
and what I mean by this is again, so I like to allow my brain the opportunity to think about things from a very external perspective, meaning that there's something greater at work than what we can see.
Right.
In the shadows, or however you want to describe it. So you asked a very good question. Why now? Why, for the first time in history, after driving rates up like insanity and not giving any warning, now they're giving warning about the rates coming down, but they haven't done it yet. So they haven't actually done it. They're just saying they're going to. And one of the things that we've seen is fear. Fear is something that really drives the public. The public responds to the media. The public responds to what the professionals say. So as a realtor, as a professional, if I go to your home and I give you advice, you're going to likely listen to that advice. And as long as it's mimicking something that you've heard somewhere else, if it's just, like high in the sky, but the world is becoming very tinfoil hatty. Like, we are starting to wonder, okay, are we just puppets in this game? And are you really just pulling our strings? And are we just, and so I don't like to put the hat on all that often, because I do think that there's a lot of really good people in government, really good people doing trying to do really good work. I just also think there are some things out there And then you want to, before you respond to that information, you might want to verify and clarify that it's actually going to happen. Because like you said, if everyone just starts buying because they've removed the fear, oh, we're going to lower interest rates, it's a great time to buy. Removing fear, well, then people start to act upon that because they're listening to these entities saying, hey, we're going to be nice to you now. We're going to be friendly to your bank accounts again. And you're like, okay, awesome. Now we can go back and start to make money like we were for the last 5 to 7 years. But what if they do it once and then they go back up, right? Like people don't understand, just because the entity says this is their plan does not mean they're going to follow through. So I would caution anyone in the audience, Canada or the US, this is why it has to work today. I will tell you, I would be, if I'm going to play the game of margins, I think the rates are going to drop. I do believe the market is going to rise. I think in Windsor, Essex, we're going to go from an average of about 515 to probably somewhere around 615, maybe even up as high as 650 this calendar year. But that also, just so we're clear, could have the inverse effect. We could go down another $20,000 to $50,000. I don't think, I always tell people there is a margin where like fallout does seem to stop. Like there's just no way to get below, just the cost of everything has kind of held it there. Cost of material, cost of life, cost of things. But yeah, when you're putting the tinfoil hat on and you're saying, why are you telling us now? My brain goes, I think they're up to something, and they've got to have a reason beyond just, hey guys, we want to give you this nice little heads up. It's like, what are you really doing? And where should I be looking? So you say this to me and you're trying to get my focus here. How do I take my focus and look at where I'm supposed to in light of this information, and not just agree and go, okay, well, that's great. I'm going to buy up the properties. I'm going to do this thing. I'm going to put 6 properties under contract. I'll move them forward. And then don't worry about the interest rate being so secure today because it's going to be lower tomorrow. Man, I would
you could be in trouble, right? Because think about it. If inflation, they get the numbers back for inflation, they're like, oh, they actually went up and we can't do it, or they went so bad that we just need to raise again, and it's going to be their reaction, and they are not held responsible for any of the promises that they not even promises, any quotes that they've said.
Well, and that's unfair. See, I think that if the Bank of Canada or the Fed comes out and they say, so here's the thing. I think if you're going to make policy, there's nothing wrong with a 6-month policy, and to walk it out as a 6-month policy, and outside of, call it catastrophic, the US goes to war, Canada goes to war, something comes to something happens on a level that is beyond the foreseeable. But if you're looking at the true economy and you want to give us a heads up and say, for the next 6 months, we're going to operate this way, we're going to reevaluate then, instead of what they've been doing, which is usually, every month and a half to 2 months, they're coming out and telling us more info. Fine. That's okay. But if you're not going to change the way you actually function in the process, then you can't change the way you communicate in the process, because otherwise, how can you want us to trust you? I'm sorry. I'm not going to. I'm going to make the best decisions with the information today. I'm not going to trust a government entity or any real entity that's going to say, don't worry, it's okay. And that's just because, you know what I've learned in life? The only person I can control is me. I have no control over anybody else. So if I want to make the best decisions for me and my family today, I need to use the information that's provided today and make sure that I verify and clarify with professionals in my life what my risks are, and not try to bet on the future. It doesn't mean I'm not going to play in the game. Doesn't mean I'm not going to set myself up with, like I said, get that locked in rate now. And if it goes down, make sure the bank's going to let you take the best rate at the time. And if the best rate's still your rate, then great. And then everything works out exactly as it does. And if it doesn't work on that rate, please, and you're not willing to take on the risk, don't make the deal. Just say, no, it's good. I'll move on to the next one. There's one of the other things is there's going to be more deals. There's going to be lots of opportunity in life. Don't get so caught up in the current one that you miss out on the one you were supposed to grab because you're too busy focused on this. There's lots of opportunity in life. Real estate's one of those really cool spots, but there's all kinds of other things coming. AI's out there now. Like, what does that have to do with what's upcoming next and how the world responds to it? One of the things for investors, whether it's real estate, whether it's life, make sure you know what you're doing, talk to smarter people than yourself, and put the tinfoil hat on sometimes and really just ask yourself some of those really tough questions that we want to avoid because we just want everything to be nice and breezy and easy. But when we don't do the tough questions, then we put ourselves in tough spots later, right? We ask the tough questions up front when you buy. Magically, there's not as many tough questions when you're trying to sell.
No, that's a really good point, right? Awesome. That even for me, that gets me the wheels turning, right? Because what you all you want to do is look at an article, summarize it into like 2 sentences, and just take that at a grain of salt. Anyway, yeah, Jordan, thanks for coming on the show. That was great. People wanted to track you down. Where do they find you?
So you can reach out to me at jordansilvester.com. You can also reach out direct at 519-960-0350. That'll reach my team. And then if you have any questions regarding investing in Windsor, or if you need any support across the border in Michigan, I got some really good guys I know over there that do investing, and I've got realtors throughout Canada. So if you do need any advice, I got professionals in locations that are local to the market. If you just want to chat about investment strategies or ideas you've got, I always like to pick the brains of other human beings. Reach out across those platforms. Would be more than happy to have some discussions with your audience and or, other people looking to start investing.
Awesome. Well, Jordan, thank you for coming on the show. I really appreciated your insight. This is great.
Hey, thanks so much for having me, my friend.
That was a nice video. Bye.